to the Faces of Truth, where we attempt to help America think for itself again. I'm Alexander McCauley. I'll be your host for the next 15 minutes to half hour. Shout out to those who subscribed during the past week. We increased by 1 subscriber. Fun. I'm still in production of my Truth About Carbon dioxide episode, and we'll be putting that out within the next month, hopefully. However, today we're going to be covering the political spectrums that have driven our politics for since the nation began. We've operated under two, specifically, the contemporary and the founders. In the contemporary, we see a battle between the right and the left, which consists of a battle between fascism, which is a brand of socialism, and communism, which basically there really is no battle. I mean, since both systems are pretty much an almost total government system. You are manipulated by your government. And then, supposedly, the United States government is dead center. In the days of the founders, they went on an entirely different spectrum. Their spectrum was, you either had the volume all the way up, in other words, too much government, the people couldn't breathe, or you had the volume all the way down, too little government, in other words, the people could infringe on each other's rights. Both of these sides of the spectrum inevitably led to the same conclusion. They ended up on the left side of the spectrum, total government. Now, our spectrum right now pretty much takes the founders' spectrum and moves it to the left. So, the leftists, the radical leftists, are all the way over to the left. However, the alt-right seems to be a little bit closer to the right. But they're both on the left side of the founders' spectrum. Now, what we find ourselves seeing in all systems that the left sets up is that all of your bureaucrats and your nobility, is basically what I like to call it, are all the way over here on the right side of the spectrum, being able to do basically whatever they want, whenever they want, to whomever they want. And all of the citizens are over here on the left side of the spectrum, being put upon by the government, having to do every whim that the government wants. Whereas dead center on the founders' spectrum actually means not compromise between two totalitarian systems, but the perfect balance between the protection of your rights by government and the ability of the citizen to live their life as they please, as long as they don't infringe on the rights of their fellow citizens. The minute they start infringing on the rights of their fellow citizens, violating those rights, in other words, destroying property, taking life, or coercing people to do things that they don't want them to, or that they don't want to do, then government steps in to say, sorry, you can't do that. We have to put you in detention for a few years, and sort of reformat the way that you interface with your fellow men so that you can be a functional citizen again. This doesn't really happen nowadays because we're locked between totalitarianism and totalitarianism. Fighting over each other. Of course, this side of the totalitarian spectrum, I call it, believes that infant lives matter. This one says, hang the infant. This side believes that all are equal. This side believes that there are a few elites and everyone else is a paltry nothing. This side believes that business should be subsidized. This one believes that the individual should be bought off by the government and business should be subsidized. This one believed in absolute war overseas. This side believed in, absolute war overseas. Both believed in destabilizing nations in order to establish communism in those nations. Now, what I'm talking about here is, of course, now we label these sides Democrats and Republicans. Now, if we truly look at the founders' spectrum, we find ourselves with a fight between leftists and conservatives. Conservatives want to conserve their freedom, their rights. They want to be responsible citizens, whereas leftists desire, the politicians on the left desire more power, more authority, more. They want more. They are what I call United States nobility. Well, you know what United States thinks about nobility. We had a revolution over it. No man should be regarded as above any other man. Actually, when we elect someone as a politician, we get a downgrade in status. We get cuffed, and that's the way it should be. The politician can act as a citizen in his private time, but during his, when he's executing his responsibility, the only thing he is allowed to do is, if he's a legislature, make laws that protect life, liberty, and property. If any of these laws violate any of the rights listed generally, then they are unconstitutional. They are outside the job description of that politician. In the case of executives, their responsibility is to execute the law. They hire people to help them execute those laws. In other words, they hire military, police, and advisors. But they can only appoint advisors to help them do their responsibilities, which are design treaties, execute the law, and pardon those who have been wrongly accused, and well, you get the picture. It's all about making sure that people are left free through the law to do what they do best, use their lives to innovate, etc. Now, what we see today is the left having monopolized big cities, especially inner cities, and they have herded the black minority community into these cities, and they have done everything in their power through their acquisition of power in those cities to undermine the status of Black America. Black America has understandably become extremely exasperated with this behavior. Basically, the plantation has gone from the South to every city in the United States. What they grow on these inner city plantations is votes. They say, if you're not Democrat, you're not black. Oh my goodness. Does this sound familiar? It's racism of the blackest dye. We had a president for 8 years past who indulged in the deepest form of racism ever. By this I'm talking about Barack Hussein Obama. The man instituted so much deep state garbage that right now we are fighting to try and get our country back. However, he put in back doors and insurance policies to make sure that we remained in subjugation to a Democrat totalitarian, or the leftist totalitarians, the deep staters, etc. I'm not going to pick on Democrats anymore because there are a lot of voters on the Democrat side that are very, very good people. I've known them. What they believe in is what the Democrats used to believe in during the JFK administration, which was equality of race, equality of mankind. These radical leftists don't believe in that. They believe in denigration of those that they believe infringed on the rights of others, when in all reality, they were the ones that infringed on the rights of those that they continue to say the conservatives infringed on the rights of. In the last few weeks, we've seen Civil War monuments defaced, knocked down, burned and so forth. We've seen images of Columbus destroyed. Or not exactly destroyed, but abused. What we refuse to see, though, as Americans, is the fact that once you lose your history, the totalitarians can do exactly what they want with you. Those who want to subjugate you can do exactly what they want with you. If there are no reminders to show you what they've done before, oops, you haven't a leg to stand on. Let's take, for instance, Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus came over to the United States after a persistent battle with Spain and Portugal to try and get funding to open up a Western trade route. That was his sales pitch. He was a Mason. And they knew in the West there was a land that would be considered eventually a New Jerusalem, a land of freedom, a bastion of liberty for all men. He finally got the funding. He finally got his ships. His men almost mutinied on the way across to go back home. However, finally, they set foot in the New World, the New Jerusalem, which he had at the core of his attempt to find out whether the world was actually round. In the process, he became very friendly with the natives. As a matter of fact, you could consider him a Native American sympathizer. He was so fond. Some of the people he brought over from Spain had a tendency to abuse the natives, and he got blamed for it. Why? Because Ferdinand and Isabella wanted to increase their empire. they got so aggravated with his love of the natives that they actually kept him in prison. They imprisoned him on his third voyage back to Spain. Why? Because he would not loot the native populations for their gold and resources. He would not enslave them. As a matter of fact, if the natives worked for them at all, he would use part of the financing from, if they worked for them at all, he would reimburse them in trade. After he was gone, he was replaced by a man of bloody intent. A man by the name of Cortez. Of course, we know that most Cortezes that assume, or that at least two of the Cortezes that have assumed a position of power have become great tyrants. I think you know who I'm talking about, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But this Cortez worked a desolation across the Latin America that would have made Hitler blush. How did he do it? Biological warfare. Oops. He had had Black Plague on his ship while they had crossed the Atlantic. So he introduced those infected blankets to the native population, which had been under shelter in place for an eternity, thereby compromising their immune systems to the point that they had no immunity whatsoever to the Black Plague. Bubonic plague tore through that civilization like nothing else. The survivors came out with a resilient immune system. However, the population of Latin America had been dramatically decreased, and those survivors were enslaved by the people, by Cortez and his minions. Well, after they started dying off even more because of being overworked, Cortez and his minions started importing black Africans to Latin America. Oh my. We see where this is going. The black Africans and the Native Americans were forced to tear down the Native Americans' temples, melt the gold into bullion, and destroy the Native Americans' history. Meanwhile, the same travesties were being executed by another general for the Spanish military named Francisco Pizarro, except he was further north. He was spreading disease and pestilence among the people of the southern, or the indigenous tribes of southern United States and northern Mexico. He was mapping the entirety of the continent. But he was also enslaving the population. These weren't white men. These were elitists that had come over not just to explore, but to exploit. Nowadays we have the same thing going on. We've got the leftists, who are elitists, here to exploit. And we've got the conservatives, which are attempting to bring our system back to the central place, who are basically being marginalized and exploited. We find that we are being manipulated into destroying our history. We find that the elitists are saying, oh, it's not us that are the iniquitous ones. It's the conservatives. It's the Columbuses, not the Pizarros or the Cortezes that are the iniquitous ones. It's the Columbuses. It's not the leftists, deep statists that are the iniquitous ones that actually continued the slave trade until the Civil War and led anti-African groups such as the KKK. No. That was the conservatives. What I'm saying is, the elitist trash that attempts to take hold of every political system tries to blame its iniquities on those that were attempting to do good for the world. Pizarro and Cortez blaming slavery of the Indians and mass genocide on Columbus. Not them, Columbus. Deep state elitists and globalists blaming racism and tyranny on conservatives when it's actually them that are trying to take free men hostage and eliminate their ability to worship their God as they see fit, and their ability to gather, saying, oh, it's entirely fine for leftist movements to gather. But if you're protesting the abortion of blacks en masse, then you're killing Granny. If you're protesting the fact that you've been held hostage for 3 months by the elitists in the United States for a virus that turns out to be less deadly than influenza A or B, then you're wrong. you refuse to wear a mask, as these leftist elitists demand you do, then you're killing the aged. You're killing the black. If you refuse to stay 6 feet away from your neighbor at all times, so that they can track your cell phone to make sure that if someone tests positive in that area, they can track you down and test you for the virus and antibodies, then you are the bad person. If you truly believe in equality, then you are bad. This is what we find today. Our day is a day when we have been conditioned to say, good is evil and evil is good. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a good week. I may put together another of these presentations this week. I can't wait to get the information I've found on carbon dioxide and its essentialness out, but it's taking a lot longer to produce the episode than I thought. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, subscribe, and share. Even if you didn't, I like hearing from you. I do work about 5 jobs in addition to doing this YouTube channel, so I find it hard to respond, but I do like to get feedback. Also, suggestions on topics to cover are absolutely great. So, if you have something that you'd like me to cover, go ahead and put that in the comments as well. This is Alexander McCauley with Faces of Truth. See you next time.